As we gather today, Steve has been doing a series on prayer. And 2 weeks ago, I think it was, he introduced this concept of fasting. But he asked if I would take this concept of fasting and elaborate on it and go a little bit deeper on it. So for some of you who are visiting, and especially if you don't have much of a church background experience, this may seem like a strange topic. But there is some relevance for you and for each of us, because the type of fasting I want to be talking about today is fasting for spiritual breakthrough. I know that as you've gone through life, there have been certain habits in your life that you've found hard to break. Certain patterns of your life that you just keep falling back into that same rut, and you don't seem to break free from it. And you've tried hard, you tried to put disciplines in place, you tried to make changes, but they just haven't happened. And some of that could be as simple as you just find it hard getting out of bed in the morning, or you just feel like you just need to sleep all day. It could just be avoiding exercise because it's not fun. It might be overeating. It could be any type of addiction, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, drugs, legal or illegal. It could be pornography. It could be gambling. It could be anything that you just are attracted to and you just can't seem to stop even though you want to. And it could even be simply as simple as anger. Things that you don't want to be that way, but for some reason your body keeps almost forcing you into that routine. And there's a couple of reasons why these things are hard to break, is because we really like comfort and we like escape. When life is difficult, what do you do to escape? What do you do to just get away from it all? Some people just like to sleep. Other people just strive harder to conquer and control. We do different things, but because there's a part of us that just wants to be comfortable, and so we're attracted to things that speak comfort into our lives. And that can sometimes be food. It can sometimes be, again, all these other things that we talked about. But we just want to feel comfortable, or we might want adrenaline. Sometimes it's not comfort. Sometimes we just want to feel that rush of adrenaline. We talk about adrenaline junkies that like to do stupid things like paragliding and bungee cord diving and those sorts of things. I can't relate to any of those things. But the idea here is that there can sometimes be just, you want that feeling of life. You want that feeling of excitement. And so you're attracted to those things. But the bottom line here is that both your body and mind together have convinced that you need those things in order to feel good about life. That's why we do the things that we wish we could stop doing. The reason we still do it is because it's still speaking to us in some way. It's still giving us something that we feel we need. If it didn't, then you wouldn't bother doing it. People who are trying to quit smoking find it hard to quit smoking because there's still something about that smoking that gives them something that both their body and their mind together say, I need that. And so the question is, what do you do with that? How do you break a habit when your body and mind are working together against you and really causing you to submit to your body's demands? And so, there's a lot of different approaches. And people have tried things, and some of them work. Different things work in different scenarios. But sometimes you get these types of holes in your life, and you've tried a bunch of things, but none of them have worked. And you keep falling back into the same patterns. And so what I want to hit on today with this issue of spiritual fastings is a means to help break these sinful patterns that are so deeply embedded, they disrupt your lives, and you can't seem to break free of them on your own. And the reason I call it spiritual fasting is it really is going to confront a question in your life. And the question is, what's more important for you? Survival or holiness? Survival or submission to the will of God? Now, our bodies are going to tell us survival, which can also be comfort and adrenaline can speak into those things as well. But our body's saying, this is what I need for life. But God's over here saying, no, this is what you need for life. And there's this tension between these two going on. But the problem is, as we experience, often our bodies win out. And we end up doing, and then you start doing the whole blame and judgmental thing on yourself. I'm a failure. I'm a spiritual failure. I can't measure up. I keep messing up. I keep doing the same sin over again. I can't go back to God and ask for forgiveness for this again. Man, how many times have I done that? Right? That's what we start to do. That's the games that we start to play in our minds. But what Scripture wants to do is call us to this idea of dying to self. Jesus says, like, you're not ready to follow me unless you're willing to pick up your cross and follow me. In other words, whether you're willing to die to your old pattern of life and choose to follow me. And so Jesus, though, says, I've come here to set you free. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free as you embrace the truth, not just when you intellectually know it. If you've been going to church for any period of time, you intellectually know the truth, but you're having a hard time embracing the truth and applying it to your life and trusting it. And so, really, every sin issue in our lives, everything that we do wrong against the character of God and the will of God, or anything that's robbing us of joy, life, and peace, anything that defeats us, is really a sin issue in our life where our flesh and our mind are telling us there are certain things you must do to get life, and don't turn to God for it, turn to these things for it. And so these things really become little mini idols in our lives. Whether it's food, whether it's, sleep, whether... These things can become idols because we think, I need to submit to that in order to get the life I believe I need to have. And so it creates this tension between us and this relationship with God. And so what I want to suggest to you is that spiritual fasting is is a helpful tool. And that's all it is a tool. It's not the be and end all answer, but it's a tool that may help you break free from sin's control and demands. This idea of fasting here, what we're talking about, in our culture, there's many different ideas of fasting. Even in Christian circles, there's many ideas of fasting. But essentially, at the core, fasting is going without food. And there's a reason for that. Now, there are different types of fasts for different purposes. In the Bible, people would do one-day fasts. Or you'd fast for grieving, or you'd fast to just spend the time with God. You'd fast, many different reasons for fasting. Today we're honing in on this one issue of fasting to break spiritual holds in your life, sin holds in your life. How can we snap some of those and start moving forward? And so Jesus was confronted with this idea of fasting as soon as he came out of obscurity. We know him when he was born. We get a small little glimpse at age 12, and then we see nothing about Jesus until the moment he comes to John the Baptist to be baptized and be launched into his next 3 years of ministry that will lead him to the cross. And so we know nothing about Jesus until this moment where he's been baptized, and it says that in Matthew 4, verses 1 to 4, excuse me, it says, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry." Gotta love those understatements. You gotta understand that Jesus is on the verge of physical death. You go 40 days without food, that's reaching the limits of what your body can handle. He is starving literally to death at this point in time. And so it goes on and says, "And the tempter came and said to him, 'If you're the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread.' But he answered, 'It's written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" And we got to figure out, what does he mean by that? And what was the whole point of this 40-day fast anyways? What's going on here? But, after that 40 days, he's starving. He really wants to eat just to continue living. That's when Satan comes along and he says, "Jesus, turn these stones into bread." And the concept of that wasn't wrong in and of itself. It would not have been wrong for Jesus to turn stones into bread. He turned water into wine. That wasn't wrong. Like, Jesus can do those sorts of things. So what Satan's telling him to do isn't a wrong thing. And it wouldn't be wrong for Jesus to eat bread. So what's really the temptation going on here? And why is this going to be a struggle? Well, we can understand the physical struggle Jesus is going to have, because he really would like to turn that stone into bread. His body would almost be demanding, you've got the ability, you do that now. Because we need food right now. That's what the body is going to be saying, and the mind's going to be saying that too. But Jesus gives this response to Satan when he says, but man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Like, why is he saying that? I mean, it's a cool little statement, and man, Satan seems to disappear right after that one for a moment. What was it about that statement that caused Satan to give up on that temptation? And what is that we can learn from that? Well, you got to understand that the statement that Jesus is giving is a quote from the Old Testament, and it comes from the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is the last book that Moses wrote. He wrote the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is at the end. The Israelites have escaped out of Egypt. They've been wandering through the wilderness now for 40 years. Catch that number. And they're now back at the Jordan River, about to cross over into the Promised Land. They'd been there 40 years earlier, and the Israelites distrusted God, and they rebelled, and so then they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. But now they're back here, and just before they cross over the river, the book of Deuteronomy Moses is going to remind them of their journey so far. He's going to tell them about the incredible things God has done in their life in the past, but how they kept rebelling every step of the way. How they kept distrusting God every step of the way. And how they kept grumbling, saying, hey, let's go back to slavery. Let's go back to Egypt, where it was so good being slaves, beaten and tortured. But at least we had melons. At least we had meat, all these sorts of things. And so Moses is recapping that story. And let me just read to you Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, because it was their pride and arrogance that rebelled against God's leadership, against God's plan and God's purposes, testing you to know what was in your heart. Not that God needed to know what was in their heart. He knew what was in their heart. But he wanted to test them so that they would begin to see what was in their heart and the sinfulness of their response to him. And whether you would keep his commandments or not, and he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. Manna was, if any of you know the story, if you remember, they're in the wilderness, they've got nothing to eat. They've run out of dough since they left Egypt, and so they got no bread. How are they going to survive? And God would send this miracle bread. It'd be like a dew that in the wilderness would form a crust, like little wafers. And they would go around gathering that manna. And it started right after they crossed the Red Sea, escaping from Egypt, to the day that they stepped foot into the Promised Land. God sent manna to feed them through that journey. And he says that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And what God is saying, God is saying to the people through Moses, he says here is, you failed every step of the way. There was this tension that they kept having with God, that as they go into the wilderness, there is times when they would go 3 days without water. God would just even not give them water. And 3 days after 3 days without water, you're extremely thirsty. Again, that's a critical point as well. And their response, though, was instead of just turning out, hey, God, we trust you. You've got a plan. Obviously, you did all those miracles in Egypt, and you rescued us, divided the Red Sea so we could get across. And man, now... yeah, God, we just trust that you've got this all under control. Well, that wasn't the response. The response is, why, you just brought us out here to the wilderness to die? Let's turn around and go back to Egypt. It was all rooted in a distrust of God to give them life. A distrust of God to give them what they needed. And so what they did was they started grumbling, and they started grumbling some more. And they did come to a pool eventually that had water, but it was a bitter water. In other words, poisonous. And that's when the grumbling really stirred up, because they could almost see it in front of them, but it was still out of reach to quench their thirst. And now God sweetened the water. He made it pure, sweet. I don't know what sweet water is, but he sweetened the water so it was now safe to drink. There was another time when again they claimed that they didn't have the dough, and so then God sends manna, a miracle bread that they could never anticipate it. They could never have seen that God was going to feed them through this dew that formed into crystals on the ground or wafers on the ground. Who would have even thought of that? And then another time they were without meat, and so God sends in this wind that brings like thousands of quail that feeds all the Israelites for a long time. And got to keep in mind, there's approximately 2 million Israelites at this point in time. So when he's providing water, when he's providing manna, when he's providing quail, he's providing mass quantities in order to take care of all of them. Another time that they had no water and they start grumbling and saying, we're going to go back to Egypt again, he tells Moses, strike a rock. And water flows from the rock, enough, to take care of 2 million people plus all their herds. Like, this is astounding how God wants to provide. But the Israelites, every single time, they had this tension with God is, can I really trust you to give me life? Or do I have to keep taking things into my own hands and even turning back to something that I hated in the past? And that's sort of what we do when it comes to spiritual bondages, right? There's things that we hate that we do, but we keep doing them. Why is that? We keep doing them because we distrust that God will give us life. And our bodies and our minds have become so used, yeah, but I've always done it this way, and at least it gives me something, even if it's temporary, even if it gives me guilt and shame afterwards, it still gives me something. I can feel it. And that's what the body wants. It wants to feel life. And so even if I get a taste of it, then that pull is so strong that we give into it. But in so doing, what we're saying in our spirits is, God is not sufficient. He is not adequate, actually, to meet my needs. And so, because it's really all about me and my comfort and my survival, I got to take things into my own hands and do things this way. And so this is what's going on. And so this tug of war happens. And God will actually even test us at times, just because sometimes we think, hey, I'm doing really great. Yeah, God's wonderful. Yay, God. And God will actually allow you to go through a time of testing to test your heart. Not because he doesn't know where your heart is, but sometimes we don't really know where our heart is until he allows us to test it. And for some of us, that can be, is anything in your experience going to influence what you do other than the will of God? Is it a bad relationship? Going to make you not do certain things because that's going to control you more than what God would want you to do? Is it a bad church experience? Is it a bad job experience? Is it a bad whatever? Is there anything in your life that is determining what you do with your life differently than what God would do if he had full control? Because we don't trust God's control, we put up these walls of defenses. We turn back to old sinful patterns that trap us and keep us from experiencing life. And so this is where we're struggling. We got this tension, this tug of war, and unfortunately, when it's a tension between the flesh, what my body wants and feels it needs, versus the will of God, often my body wins out. And that's the problem. It's the cravings of the flesh keep making the decisions. And that was the problem. The Israelite story is all that. So Jesus comes along and says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And what he's saying to Satan is saying, Satan, by me quoting this passage, I'm immediately referring back to the Israelite story where they failed, where they did not trust God, that they didn't, their focus was, no, man just needs bread to survive. And God's saying, no, you need my will in your life to survive. And Jesus is saying to Moses, or to Satan, where the Israelites failed, I'm going to stand firm in trusting the provision and the purposes of the Father. I will not give in to the demands of the flesh. My body is not going to tell me what to do. God is going to tell me what to do. My deep longings for survival is not going to tell me what to do. God is going to tell me what to do, and I submit to him, to every word that comes from the mouth of God about how to live versus what my body is going to tell me about how to live. And he's saying that really worship alone, worship of the Father alone is going to determine my actions. Well, that's a pretty powerful statement. You see, the problem with turning the stones into bread was not turning stones into bread. The problem of turning the stones into bread was that God had, the Father and the Spirit had called Jesus into the wilderness for a time of fasting. And he had not called that time off yet. Even though Jesus was on the verge of physical death, the fasting wasn't finished yet. You see, what determines what you do with your life? The will of the Father or your desires, your comfort, your longing for a feeling of life. And so this is where it comes into play. And I don't know if you didn't catch it, the correlation between Jesus being in the wilderness for 40 days was symbolic of the Israelites being in the wilderness for 40 years. They were in the wilderness for 40 years of testing. Jesus is experiencing that intense testing in 40 days. They went without food or water maybe for 3 days. Jesus went without for 40 days. Like, it's a much accelerated, condensed 40-year experience into 40 days. Jesus is going to experience everything they do. And if you go through that passage and you look at the next two temptations, Jesus, each one quotes a passage from the Israelite journey through the wilderness where they failed. And he's making a declaration, I will not fail where they failed. I'm going to stand firm and let the will of the Father make the decisions for my life. And so, you got to think through, if Jesus could not defeat the demands of the flesh for survival at this moment, would he ever made it to the cross? Knowing what that torture would be like. Knowing what he would have been going through, that life and death tension at extreme power. Man, if Jesus didn't have this pattern of submission to the will of the Father, could he have ever done that? And Luke 22:42, when Jesus is in the garden and he's about to be arrested and then crucified, he's saying this, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. And the suffering that he's going to experience, the torture, and then the death experience, take that from me, yet, I love this, not my will, but yours be done. Even if it means me dying. I will not protect my life. I put my life in your hands, not my will, but you're the one who's sovereignly in control. I understand you've got the big picture under control. And so it goes on, it says, then an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly. God, really? And sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. I mean, this is a tense moment for Jesus. And my guess is we've never experienced a moment like this. I don't think you've gotten so anxious that you actually sweated blood. But Jesus understood what was waiting for him. And if he had not been fully committed to the will of God, if he couldn't survive another day of not eating bread, there's no way he would have survived the cross, which was critical to our salvation. And so this is what Jesus is going through. And so, yeah, okay, how does that really relate to us? Well, the problem is we let our stomachs influence our obedience. And when I say stomachs, I mean just the flesh and whatever it says that we should do. It's whatever my physical, emotional desires are. If I say that's going to make the decisions of my life, then I've essentially declared, God, I'm not trusting your will. I'm not trusting your provision. My survival and me feeling good is more important than obedience to you. And the problem is that hasn't worked so well for us. The problem is, and you stay in bondage. The problem is you still don't have joy and peace. The problem is you still aren't effective. The problem is you still don't have a sense of purpose and significance. The problem is you're distant from God. It's every problem. Every problem in this world exists because there is a distrust of God's approach to life and his gift of life. And Jesus is saying, I'm calling you back to the will and the heart of the Father. And so we establish these sinful patterns, and even when we want to change, our bodies and minds won't let us. And so what spiritual fasting does then, and so when I'm talking about fasting here is talking about just going without food for a stretch of time. And I think the stretch of time for this type of fasting needs to be a little bit longer than a day. I mean, I can fast unintentionally. Often it's like 4 o'clock and realize, oh, I haven't eaten yet. That's just my life pattern often. It's not healthy, it's not good, but that's sometimes what I can have done. So for me to go a day without food, that's not a huge biggie, like at least a daytime without food. But what happens when you do a spiritual fasting from food for a longer period, whether it's 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, 2 weeks, or 40 days. I've known some people who've done the 40-day fasts. What it does is it's taking the most basic demand of your flesh. You might have an addiction to smoking. You might have an addiction to whatever your addiction is, or whatever sinful pattern that you're finding hard to break. Those are things you keep thinking you need. But what your body needs at the most basic level that overrides all that is food. You have to have food, literally, physically, to survive. And so what happens when you strip away food from your life, your body is going to start yelling and screaming at you, saying, this isn't right. Get back to the counter. Get back to the table. Get back to McDonald's. Whatever it is, your body's going to start screaming at you, saying, you need to eat. And you're saying, no, I'm not. Now, I'm going to call this spiritual fasting because you can just do that as a physical fast. But where spiritual comes in is that really to change your spirit's heart and your mind's pattern, you really want the Spirit of God involved in this process where you're submitting to the will of God, not just going through a physical exercise. And so what we encourage is at times when you're feeling hungry, that those are times of prayer. Those are times you go back to your Bible to hear the words of the mouth of the Lord. Or to spend time in here praying, hey, God, would you do this transformative work? God, would you help me break this pattern of self-control in my life? Because I don't have self-control, and I want to have self-control, but, I also understand that self-control is a fruit of your Spirit in my life, and yet somehow I've been not experiencing self-control in my life because I've been hindering you in that area of my life. And so, God, I don't want to hinder you in that area of my life. I want that barrier drawn down, that false idol in my life of what I think I need. I want to tear that down so that your Spirit can come into that area and fill that area, and you will give me self-control. It's your ability of self-control in me that I long for. So, Jesus, would you do that? Would you help me break down these barriers that I haven't been able to break down by myself? Would you come in? Would you do that? Would you do that healing work? And so what fasting is doing, it's you physically saying to your body, you're not going to tell me what to do. And it's going to scream loud, and depending on how long you do the fast, it's going to scream maybe louder and louder, but they go through phases. And what you're saying is, God, I'm submitting to you. Not my will, but yours be done. Would you do this transformative effect in my life? Would you break these sinful patterns that I've established? Would you do a transforming healing work in me? And so as we learn to do that, then we start hungering for a deeper relationship with God, and it starts to break this hold in your life. And so sometimes people will do a fast and they'll drink fruit juices and stuff like that. I just encourage water, because what we're still doing when we take fruit juices, we're still feeding the sugar addiction. One of the big addictions that we have is actually the sugar. So I've been fasting for the previous 4 days, and sort of ended it last night because I was starting to get a little bit lightheaded, and I thought, oh man, I have to do all the setup for Explorer Church. I have to preach there, then I have to preach here. So I thought, okay, I was starting to get a little lightheaded, even us picking up the bins and moving, like, whoa. Okay, I better get some sugar into me. But what's happening at these times is the body is just saying, you need to stop, and you need to just eat. But I want to be able to say at certain times, saying, no, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going through this process. And when I'm feeling the pains and the headaches or the body aches because my body's yelling for food, I go, that's great. Because that's what this is all about. It's about the body and its demand for comfort, not making your life decisions. Now, as I talk to people about fasting, most people saying, I couldn't do fasting. Now, for medical reasons, you may not be able to do fasting. You know, whether it's diabetes or whatever, you have to discuss that stuff with your doctor. But most reasons, people say, oh, I couldn't do fasting, that would just kill me. Well, that's the point. Your body is telling you that it's got that much control on you that you can't even consider that as an option. Your body's winning before you even start. It's got such a hold. And so that's the point of when you're in fasting and saying, oh man, I didn't realize it was going to be this uncomfortable. And that's the problem. Fasting is not fun. It's not pleasant. It's suffering in a way. But that's the point. Is that you're saying, yeah, but that's not going to make the decision. My body's emotional response is not going to make the decision about what I do with my life. God is. And so I'm going to die to self. And so when I'm hungry, I say to my body, yeah, deal with it. Because I've died to you as the decision maker of my life. Only the Father is going to tell me what to do. And I'll only do what I see the Father doing. And so at those moments, my body is going to put up an intensive fight. And so this is where it gets fun. And your mind is going to start kicking in. But that's where I just keep saying, during those times, confess the sin to Jesus that you're wanting to defeat in your life, the holds you're wanting to defeat in your life, or the purposes that you want to see Jesus fulfill through your life. Just use those times of suffering saying, hey, Jesus suffered far worse than this. He did this for 40 days. I'm only in the day 2. Right? And so the idea here is if Jesus can do that, then Jesus can do that through me now. The submission to the Father that Jesus experienced, Jesus can do that in and through me now. Me, in my own ability, never could. This is the point. The spiritual fasting is you relying on the Father to give you life, His ability to go through the process to say no to your body, even though your body is going to, in a sense, torture you to get back to what it thinks it needs and demands. And so that's why I say it has to be longer than just a few days. Anyone can just go a few days. I think it really has to be a minimum of probably 4 days, even up to a week. Because until your body surrenders, and you do go through the phases, and I'll talk a little bit about the phases in the few moments we have left. But listen to this. What Paul is saying is, you need to crave God more than life itself. You gotta beat your body down and listen to God's leading. Listen to what he says in 1 Corinthians 9:24. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So, run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. See, any Olympic athlete has to be incredibly disciplined in what they eat and what they do and how early they get up and practice, and they got to push through the pain of the exercises. But they're doing it because they have a goal established in their mind. Paul's simply saying the same thing for us. Guys, if you're going to follow Christ, make Christ your goal. Make full obedience and submission to the leadership of Christ in your life. Make that your goal, and that then will break free all the other things that are holding you back. So he goes on here and says, they do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable, in other words, eternal life. So he goes on and says this, I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one just beating the air. But I discipline my body, or I beat my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. In other words, that, yeah, I'm telling others to walk with God, but then I go off and my body says, yeah, but you do this. And he embraces sin because of sinful patterns, sinful longings. He says, no, the thing that keeps me in ministry is me disciplining my physical body and my mind and setting it apart for God and not letting it give into its own selfish desires and sinful patterns. So Paul's saying, yeah, how are we going to do this? Let's do it. I do want you to know that I think oh darn, I forgot to bring a piece of paper. I'd actually outlined the 4 days I had. I can remember some of it. But just so you understand the process of fasting, what it's like. Days 1 and 2 can sometimes be the hardest. That's when you're experiencing hunger. You get headaches from sugar withdrawal. Your stomach starts screaming for food. In fact, these are the toughest days. I found that I started to fast I ate supper one night, and then that started the fast from that point on. I found that by 18 hours later, I was starting to get headaches, and that's the sugar withdrawal. And so I'm starting to get these headaches, and even into night, like especially around supper time that next night, I'm saying, oh man, my eyes are sore, my head's sore, and man, you just want to go and grab a bite to eat. And so this can be the hardest. Some people start to feel really grumpy and lethargic. Your body's used to getting what you want, and sort of the shock to the system. Day 2, I found actually was not bad until later on in the day, like supper time and stuff like that. Then you start, oh man, I could really use some more food, and then the headache started again. Actually, that night, even my legs started aching a little bit for whatever reason. I found it hard to sleep. I maybe got only a few hours sleep that night. Isn't it interesting how your body screams at you and controls you just because you didn't give it what it wanted for a few hours? Day 3, you're less hungry, and your body starts to burn fat, weight loss. And I find this between day 3 and 4, though, this is where the mind games start. It's kind of fun. Well, I could just eat that little thing. Or I think juice is okay. Or you start creating all these exceptions. I could end the fast early. Yeah, I've done pretty good, you know. I could. And seriously, the mind games that start about trying to manipulate you to get you to eat. But, you know, after that, then you get into a stretch where actually you're not as hungry. Actually, yesterday, I wasn't really all that hungry. There were moments I'd walk into the kitchen and you almost just reach for a crack or something. Like, oh, no. You almost don't even think about it. You just almost go, because that's patterns, right? At meal times, the pattern, the routine almost guides you. And so you just have to stop. No, I'm not going to do that. You go get a good glass of water, drink lots of water. And but what's going on is after day 4, 5, you start getting more of a mental clarity, because your body is starting to go more into survival mode, and so it transfers all its energy into your thinking, so that you can think of a way to survive, right? And actually, so there's different phases. There's after like day 5 and 6, you start to get that clarity. Even in week 2, you get an extra degree of clarity. Yeah, so if you're ever needing to make decisions on life and stuff like that, sometimes it's just good to rob your body of its focus, and it sends all the focus to the mind, so that the mind becomes sharp and very clear. Some of the challenges are, like yesterday, so at the end of day 4, I was starting to get a little bit lightheaded just from the lack of the sugar and stuff like that. And so doing physical exercise wasn't a great idea. So I'd be picking up the bins, whoa. I better sit down on this one. So that's why we called in reinforcements, just to help us. But that's some of the things that are going on. But the goal here, again, is, guys, is just saying, God, I just want to hunger more for you and your righteousness than I do for whatever my flesh wants to do. And so what we do find is that sometimes these types of fasts can break the cycle of your body controlling you, and you get to control you. Or better yet, God gets to control you, because you surrender now control to Him as opposed to surrendering control to your body. And so part of you is saying, oh, I could never do a fast. Case in point. The only reason you can't do a fast is because your body won't let you suffer. You're fearful of suffering. You say, I don't deserve to suffer. I should never suffer. Well, you know what? God uses suffering to bring you freedom. And so this is what he called Jesus to go through the suffering, to make sure there were no patterns that would prevent him from accomplishing God's will in his life. And sometimes spiritual fasting is for that purpose, for you simply saying, God, I'm just going to do this because I want to be fully submitted to your will and not let my flesh make the decisions. And so if you want that type of freedom, I encourage you to try it. Choose your time wisely. Choose a time when there's not a family gathering at the big feast. Choose your time when when you're not going to have to exert a lot of energy. Choose a time. And if any of you want even some more specific tips on that and experiences, you're welcome to talk to me. But we share this with you for wherever you're at in your life. If you are in some ruts that you can't seem to break free of, you've tried everything else, then why not? What do you lose? Except for maybe like 10 pounds. You know, it's something worth trying. And so if you want some further direction on that, yeah, I'm more than glad to connect with you over coffee and just talk about that. But something for you to pray about and see if God's speaking to you saying, yeah, I would actually like you to do that. And then discuss when and how. Let me pray. Father, man, my body, it has its own mind, literally. And Father, it often wants to take control itself. It wants to make the decisions. And to be honest, I've submitted to that. I've let that be the pattern in my life, and that's why it's so hard to break now. But Father, I want to be fully surrendered to your leading, to your will, to what you say gives life. And so, Father, I pray for each one of us here. Would you just show us the patterns in our life that we haven't yet broken, that you want to break because you want us to have greater joy, greater peace, more abundant life. And Father, would you just reveal those things to us? And would you just, whatever steps you want us to take, would you put that on our hearts? Would you give us a prompting? If you want some of us here to do a fast, then would you just prompt us to do that? And if there's something else you want to do, just prompt us in that direction. But Lord, would you keep shaping us to be more like you? I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.